of homophobia. So you may find that people talk about the whole notions of the double oppression and the triple oppression. It's not about trying to somehow reduce homophobia as something that's not important. It's about trying to see how complex it is when one talks about these different isms that they carry with them. So to talk about anyone, the quest is always to somehow journey through an interrelated kind of a process that takes into account all the differences that people bring with them, so that you understand the complexities, the broader issues that affect people. Do I feel marginalized? No, I don't feel marginalized. I experience racism, and I think they're different issues.
Well, we'll pick up on that later,
Yeah.
okay? Thank you, Wesley. My next guest is Staff Sergeant Mike Gilbey from the Kingston Police Services. Welcome, Mike. Should Canadians conquer their fear and hate toward gays and lesbians?
I guess my question back, Barry, would be it's unfortunate that we have to even ask that question, or that there needs to be a fear. I guess I begin by thanking the many brave men and women that have brought the issue to awareness within the larger communities. It's all too often, unfortunately, with a lot of the social ills that many people have to be victimized and have to knock on the doors of large organizations like the police for many years. But I guess the good part is that groups such as police and government and other agencies are starting to get the message. So I have to thank those people, because they're the people that come in to educate people like myself. I think I was relating to you my experiences as a very young person in 51 Division in Toronto quite a few years ago, and then returning to that area a number of years ago when I had a secondment and lived in the predominantly gay area in Toronto, and how my views and my understanding of many of the issues had changed. But I really have to thank the people who have helped me to understand more. There's certainly a lot of way to go, but with policing, I think Bruce is going to be talking next, and the work that Bruce and Dan have done in Ottawa, Metro Toronto Police, other agencies coming on board and understanding more about the issues. Crime is certainly not a new issue. Crime has been around for a long time, but understanding the motivation and realizing the impact that it has on the community at large is something new. And again, when we do education or when we do reactive investigations, it's really with the help of people in the community that we can learn more. We know that most crime goes unreported, and that certainly is probably the case in hate crimes. For instance, in Kingston over the last 2 years, we only had 28 reported hate crimes, broken down into assaults and mischiefs and other type of suspicious activity. That's a pretty small number, and I don't think we're naive to think that that's the number of incidents that happen. So we certainly have to take a very active, proactive approach to break down some of the stereotypes that we, the police, have created over the decades as to how these types of incidents are going to be treated.
From earlier guests, we heard how important it was for people to identify themselves as lesbian or gay. Are there any out gay cops in Kingston?
Well, are there gay and lesbian police officers? I think there'd have to be. I'd look back to my career 25 years ago, and I certainly, one of my best friends who's no longer a police officer, but certainly was then. You know, it's just a reality of every segment of society. So why police or any other agency should think different or treat people differently, whether they're in the organization or outside the organization, is really beyond me.
Do you feel that it's safe for a person to self-identify as
Yes.
homosexual within the Kingston Police Force?
I most certainly would.
Good to hear. My next guest is Sergeant Bruce Watts from the Ottawa Carleton Regional Police from the Hate Crime Unit. And what is your experience? Should Canadians conquer their fear against lesbian and gays?
Most definitely, and it's a continuing and a continued challenge that we in Canada must always try to work towards. But I want to talk a little bit about what we do in the hate crime section, and our responsibility is to investigate hate crimes which is really one of the highest levels of intolerance that we see in our society, where someone practices their intolerance and produces a criminal act against a person because of a hate they have, against their sexual orientation, race, religion, whatever the case may be. And this forum is predominantly dealing with sexual orientation issues, so I'll address that the best way I can. The hate crime itself is very horrendous and very repugnant because of the dynamics it provides to society, not just the individual. I think one of the biggest dynamics that's been identified only in the last few years by such institutions as the police, the Justice Department, the Attorney General, and the Solicitor General is the disproportional harm that it provides to the community, not just the individual. Anytime a gay man, a lesbian woman is attacked because of a hate against their sexual orientation, every person who's gay, lesbian is also being attacked and brutalized because of the terrorism that trickles throughout the community. Not to mention the dysfunctioning nature and this crippling blow it provides to society in general because of the fabric of society being tampered, disrupted, and damaged further because of that. I also like to point out that, particularly concerning sexual orientation issues, despite all the many protections we have in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Human Rights Code, the Criminal Code for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender members in our community, it's still a very hostile community out there. And the protections are wonderful on paper, but it's still a big, big challenge for institutions such as the police to try to make it a safe community so that all gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people can feel safe at night when they go to bed.
I just found it astounding that a police officer sitting there is able to use lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender just as roll off her tongue, no problem. Clearly, you've come to grips with it. My next guest is Tom Warner, a member of CLGRO, Coalition for Lesbian and Gays in Ontario. And Mr. Warner, if you could explain how long the organization has been in existence and its purpose.
Sure. We've been around since 1975, and we work on many different aspects of grassroots organizing, public education, lobbying for legislative change, and promoting lesbian and gay liberation and feminism. We feel that it's important to address the roots of the problem rather than just the symptoms being what the laws say. We have at the moment 19 member organizations throughout the province, including the Lesbian and Gay Association of Kingston, and we have about 400 individual members across the province. If I could turn for a minute to your question, and I think with respect it's the wrong question. I'd be much more interested in answering the question, will Canadians conquer their fear and hatred? And my answer would be no, not in my lifetime. But I think that's also only part of the discussion that needs to take place. Many people who don't fear or hate gays and lesbians would still nonetheless discriminate against them, would refuse to recognize their relationships, would say they should not work with children, would say they shouldn't be in positions of authority or be role models for young people. And the reason for that is heterosexism, which is not a word that's been used thus far. And to boil it down to its simplest term, it is the notion of compulsory heterosexuality, that everyone in our society is socialized from the day they are born to be heterosexual, and that the only relationships that are meaningful, right, moral, natural, or superior are those that involve members of the opposite sex. And so if you flip that, then anything involving a member of the opposite sex is not normal, is immoral, is not right, and is inferior. And unless we start talking about that and addressing those as the real issues, then the situation that other people have talked about here tonight in terms of what individual gays, lesbians, bisexuals, and transgendered people are living with is not going to change.
I see. Okay, thank you. My next guest is Mr. John Fisher from Lesbian, I understand it's a national lobby group, EGAL, Equality for Lesbian and Gays Everywhere. So John, will Canadians conquer their fear against lesbian and gays?
I believe that it is inevitable. I think we are seeing many changes already. clearly tonight's question has been framed in such a way as to elicit the many obstacles that lesbians, gays, bisexuals and transgender people face, and those obstacles are very real and very painful. At the same time, I do believe that we have seen enormous progress just in the past 25 years. It's astonishing really to think how far we have come from a time when 25 to 30 years ago it was criminal to have sex with somebody of the same sex. In the 70s, we had immigration laws in Canada which prohibited the entry into Canada of a person who was gay or lesbian. And not that long ago, 20 years ago, I could not do the work that I'm doing now in Canada without being deported. We went through a period in recent decades where the RCMP engaged in active witch hunts within the federal civil service to identify federal employees who are gay and lesbian for the sole purpose of seeing them expelled from their jobs. Large lists of people suspected of being gay or lesbian were kept, and many people did, in fact, lose their jobs. Now we have a situation where gays and lesbians are protected from discrimination in virtually all parts of Canada at the federal level and in virtually every province. Just today, I believe, Newfoundland became the most recent province to prohibit sexual orientation discrimination, another significant step. We are seeing the extension of same-sex benefits in many areas. In BC and in Ontario, it's now legal for same-sex couples to adopt children. I pick up on the point made by Tom Warner of Cielgro. I believe that when we talk about fear and hatred towards gays and lesbians, yes, there are many Canadians who are so extreme in their position, so prejudiced and intolerant that there's nothing we can say or do, no facts that will change their position. But I believe the vast majority of Canadians are not so extreme and so ignorant as that. I think most people simply haven't had a lot of contact with gays and lesbians. They maybe have been raised with certain stereotypes and myths, and as they come to know us for who we are, they recognize that we're not monsters, we're ordinary people, we're in all walks of life, and inevitably, I think, as gays and lesbians ourselves come out, become known, and recognized as the ordinary people we are, that fear, if you will, that hatred, that ignorance gets broken down, and we are moving towards a more equal society. I do agree that it's a long process, a slow process, but in my mind an inevitable one.
And is there a need then for people who are lesbian and gay to come out and identify themselves as such? Because otherwise it's just sort of like this concept or this precept of what a lesbian or gay person would look like, whereby if people did feel comfortable in self-identifying, that families would be a little bit more quicker to accept if they themselves had loved ones who were being ostracized and ill-treated.
Coming out is always a personal choice that everybody has to make for himself or herself. But there is no question that if every gay, lesbian and bisexual person in Canada came out, the impact upon education and the degree of awareness of other Canadians would be increased dramatically, and I believe it would see discrimination and ignorance drastically reduced. Certainly, it's been my experience that the pain and stress of lesbians and gays of my acquaintance who have decided to live their lives in the closet has been crippling throughout their lives, and that they have been able to live much fuller and happier lives by being out.
I see. Okay, thank you. When we're talking about incidents or problems of people who are homosexual, in Toronto, a study was done called Anti-Gay Lesbian Violence, the Impact on Individuals and Communities. In that report, it said 78% of survey respondents reported experiencing verbal assaults at least once since they were age 16. 51% were verbally threatened with physical violence. 19% had personal property damaged, and 26% had objects thrown at them. 38% reported being chased or followed. 17% were spit on. 21% reported being punched, kicked, or hit. And just over 7% reported being assaulted or wounded with a weapon. 36% of respondents reporting being sexually harassed without assault, and 17% reported being sexually assaulted, while 21% of respondents reported experience harassment with assault from police. This would be in the Toronto region. And 5% of respondents reported being beaten or assaulted by police. What is your views, and perhaps I'm just going to open up the floors as to, starting with Mike, what irritates you the most in terms of having to, people I find are wanting to know more in today's society about this issue. It's more important to them. But unfortunately, as we see the stats from Toronto, there clearly is some serious problems. This is a 1997 report. And it demoralizes, later in the report, it demoralizes people to the point that they lose faith in their family, they lose faith in everything that they have. And being a sort of a subhuman just isn't good enough for many people. What is your viewpoint on trying to alleviate some of the pressure here?
Well, one of the scariest things is that, if I deal just with the youth perspective, that young people can't even state who they are in their schools, in their families, in a system that's supposed to help them with so-called social service issues. And as we struggle with that, we'd like to believe that the service system would like to believe that we've come a long way. But indeed, certainly the comments tonight, we would understand we've got a significant way to go yet. And there is a frustration if I look at the Toronto situation, although there's been some progress. We did some research 3 years ago on what residential programs provide or don't provide for young gay, lesbian youth. And the same horror story existed as they spoke about isolation, rejection, assaults, etc., within a service system that's supposed to be providing support for them. And similarly, we continue to struggle with getting the bigger institutions to be more receptive. And there are many ways to do it. You don't have to, if people have the fear, you don't have to hire 90% gay lesbian staff to work with gay lesbian kids. There's a way of being receptive to a youth population that if funding doesn't allow the additional hiring, that there are many ways to be receptive to have the young person come in the door and feel okay. Because the first step is all about acceptance and making that person feel okay when they come through the door. So it can be frustrating when you see the reality that it takes so long to achieve that. I mean, I hate to use the phrase, it's a simple issue of equity, yet the prejudice exists when there's no reason for it other than their own issues of morality or ignorance. And just recently I was speaking a couple of days ago to a York University student who wanted to talk about the issue of how our agency deals with diversity. And I was astounded, in spite of all the information we have, that she's from a small town, Peterborough, or small relative to Toronto, and commented that in her agency where she had worked prior to returning to school, a staff could not feel comfortable to come out. So I heard earlier about the comments that a police officer could feel comfortable to come out in a police force. And yet I listened to that and sort of questioned, well, would I, if I was the cop, would I be comfortable? Yet in Toronto, we certainly expect a social service system to have any staff feel comfortable to identify or just be out. And yet it's not true. So that's very frustrating when you're talking about the basic service system they're supposed to provide support to youth, that the staff themselves can't feel comfortable.
I would also open up the show to people in the audience who might want to make a comment or ask a question. The research I've done, and this is from London, England, and there's another report I have from the U.S., but primarily these are about the 5 points that gays and lesbians are asking for. Equal recognition for young lesbians, gays, and bisexuals in our school, an end to homophobic bullying, equal treatment under the criminal law, an equal age of consent, equal protection from discrimination in the workplace, education, and provision of services and goods, equal recognition and respect for same-sex partners, equal recognition for lesbian and gay parents and their children. Do you know, to me, it doesn't seem like too much to ask. And yet, we experience something quite different. I want to get back to you, Wesley, if I might, because you said that there are special needs there in terms of racism and differentiating why you would be. So I don't want to pass up the opportunity to hear more from you if there's a special need, and then I would like to hear from Mr. Watts in terms of what his experience is compared to yours, and whether or not you find the same results.
Well, I mean, for me, I'm not sure. I mean, there's no markers as what it means to be a gay or lesbian person, aside from the signposts that has been recently created, such as the flags and the triangles, etc., all of which are very much, in my eyes, Western or North American concepts. If you don't walk with those markers or identifiers, the assumption is that you are heterosexual, as one has stated earlier. It's a sort of a heteronormative kind of understanding. I think the basis upon which black gays and lesbians or other gays and lesbians of color exist is that sexuality is not something I think we are allowed to celebrate in the same way as, say, white gays and lesbians are allowed to celebrate, because you walk with a constant reminder that you're not white. I think this racism as a factor hinders a form of celebration, I think, that white gays and lesbians are able to enjoy and partake in. Because even when you are in a context of so-called white gay and lesbian communities, you still are conscious of the type of disparity and treatment against you because you're a black person or because you're a person of color. So for me, the issue of racism is always central in how we take up other issues. And to separate it, for me, is to do an injustice to how we look at the type of work we are trying to accomplish.
And do you feel that institutions in Canadian society are trying to address that, or is it a legal fight all the way?
Well, legal challenges might be good, but I think we are talking here about the average person on the street. You're talking here about bureaucrats. You're talking about administrators. You're talking about people who have certain biases. Racism is institutionalized, as is heterosexism institutionalized. And if these things are institutionalized, I mean, certainly you have to look at fighting them on different fronts and forming different alliances. And so you're talking here about fighting them at the courts at one level. You're talking about fighting the policy at another level, community activism at another level, education. I mean, all fronts must be fought at different points. But the alliances, I think, that we form must recognize that what we are doing is very much sort of interrelated, and it's not just a one issue here. Because I think what you see with most of the gay and lesbian movements of activism that has been taking place in North America is that they've been white-dominated and white-run. And they have been white-dominated and white-run because other issues never really get addressed, in particular issues around race. And I mean, Tom can speak to that, and Fisher can speak to that, but the organizations, I'm sure I haven't been around them, are white-run and majority-controlled. And that's because there's a certain amount of I guess, privilege that goes with just being white. And so white gays and lesbians, although they are oppressed on the basis of heterosexism, there's also a privilege of being white-skinned. And that privilege, I think, is never really understood in the work they do in ways to try and incorporate other racial differences as a part of that movement for the forming of alliances. And I think this is where the whole concept gay and lesbian community is a myth, because it speaks to a particular group of people, and it does not really address the issues of difference.
I see, okay. Now, I understand that the Ottawa Carleton Police has a committee under the Police Services Board, as does Kingston Police on racism, but they don't have one for other forms of discrimination. What is your experience in trying to deal with some of the things that Wesley's describing?
I don't think there's any doubt that the way Canadians try to address homophobia is in a very Eurocentric way, based on the dominant nature of white people in our country. But when it comes to hate crime, the three main groups based on the reporting rates coming towards the police that are victimized by hate crime are black, Jewish, and gay. Gay men I'm referring to. So those are the most victimized groups in a criminal way in our country. Some of the challenges that we're trying to address in Ottawa concerning sexual orientation issues and gender choice issues is there's a committee that's been running in Ottawa-Carleton now for many years. It's going on 5 years now. It's called the Ottawa-Carleton Regional Police Committee for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Communities. And the major nature of this committee is to get members from the community, those communities together with the police, and address issues of policy, protocol, and try to make it a safer community generally in Ottawa-Carleton. So members of the hate crime section have always been there at these meetings. They run once a month for the last 5 years. And we share the complaints and the concerns that we have in the community, and the members from the community share to us the complaints and concerns they have about their own safety and ways to address those issues.
I see. And in Kingston, I understand, Mr. Gove, that you also attempt to address racist issues with the anti-racist committee, but there is no what Bruce has just described in terms of lesbian and gay. So they seem to be two separately distinct issues that are never melded together. So after Mike, maybe John and Tom would comment on it as well. And we have 7 minutes left to this portion of the show.
Well, certainly no doubt, and I certainly agree with Bruce, and I know that Ottawa-Carleton have had experiences because of the size and also their commitment to a dedicated hate crime unit and working with the community. I guess we've been doing the same thing, certainly with the help of University and Queen's and the Gay and Lesbian and Transsexual Society have helped our understanding here in Kingston. We've been involved with a number of different forums, et cetera, but I think certainly we have to continue a proactive approach to outreach, because I think we've closed our doors, excuse me, for so many years, or certainly haven't opened them and gone out into the community to allow people to understand who we are now, our willingness to learn more, and also our willingness to help.
Okay, thank you. Tom Warner, do you have a comment on that? Do you think it's successful, these efforts that you've heard described? Because I also understand in Toronto they have similar committees and efforts to deal with this.
Well, I think that they are successful as far as they go, and I mean that in a genuinely positive way, and certainly most communities still have to take those initial steps, particularly with the police. So the trend is certainly in a positive direction, but again, the actual committing of the crimes is the end result of a whole process of socialization and the cultural and social institutions of our society. And for example, until the school systems start dealing with racism and anti-racism strategies, and they start dealing with heterosexism as a factor that contributes towards violence, and racism as a factor that contributes towards violence, we're always going to have hate crimes. And so it seems, so we have this tendency to focus on fixing the end result, in this case the commission of criminal offenses, or in another context, removing the discrimination by putting sexual orientation into the Human Rights Code, all of which needs to be done, but we never really address what the real issues are that lead to those things happening.
I see. And John Fisher, you have last word on this topic.
Oh, well, I agree with Tom entirely that we have to look at fixing things at the outset, to look at particularly the education system. I agree also with Wesley that the issues are inseparable. The same kinds of biases which are systemic in society are systemic within other institutions, including lesbian and gay organizations and institutions. It's something that we have to take very seriously, and which we are working very hard to resolve, both in the context of race, but also a lot of organizations have been dominated by males in the past, by people from larger cities rather than from smaller communities, by people who are able-bodied. And I think that it's a responsibility we all share to seek to practice what we preach and make our organizations as accessible and equal as possible.
Well said. Thank you to all our panelists.